All right, so I'll just kind of reiterate since we missed hitting the record button. We're going to talk a little bit about paraprofessionals today, and we're going to switch it up just a little bit and have you read an article. And again, we all know the importance of paraprofessionals for kiddos. The ones that are supporting those with medical needs aren't quite as tricky as the ones who are needed to support students with behavioral needs. So we do have an article that we're going to have you jigsaw, and we're going to do this through a series of breakout rooms. What we'd like for you to do, and the article is entitled, "Be Careful What You Wish For, 5 Reasons to be Concerned About the Alignment of Individual or Assignment of Individual Paraprofessionals." So we're going to do a breakout room with that. We're going to have 5 or 6 rooms. And what's going to happen is I will press a button and you'll be broken out into 6 different rooms, one of 6 different rooms. If you are in room 1 or group 1, you're going to read beginning on page 29, reason 1. So you're going to read reason 1. If you're in group 2, you're going to read reason 2 and so forth. Group 6 is going to start reading the final considerations for educational teams. So again, group 1 starts with reason 1 up to group 5 doing reason 5. Group 6 will do considerations for educational teams on page 32. So we're going to give you about 10 minutes to read through that. You're going to discuss with your small groups some of those key factors, those important ideas that you get from the section that you're reading, and then we'll come back together and have a discussion. We'll have each group maybe appoint a spokesperson for their reason, so to speak, and just share a little bit about what you've learned for the good of the group. Let's see, I believe you'll be getting a 1-minute warning when we're ready to come back together, and then it will automatically bring us back together when that time is over. So are there any questions about what we're going to do? If everybody will go ahead and click on the document, 5 Reasons to Be Concerned, and it's linked in your PowerPoint, and it's also linked on the page. In just a couple of seconds, I'll break you into rooms. Again, go ahead and read your section based on what group number you are. Discuss it, come up with key ideas, appoint a spokesperson, and then we'll come back together and share.
Where do we see our groups at?
Your groups will pop up on your screen. Once you break out, you will see all the members of your group just like you're seeing now. It'll just be a smaller group. I don't know how many people are with us today, but there will be 2 or 3 people probably per group. And that you'll want to make sure that you unmute. Again, kind of read your section and then have a discussion. All right, any other questions before we try this wonderful technology? Hearing none, we'll go ahead and give it a try. Okay, so there'll be about 3 participants per room. We're going to be going now. All right, everybody should be in their rooms or going to their rooms. Tasha?
What?
Let's see, I didn't get you into a room, did I?
Yeah, I'm in room 1.
I'm sorry, what?
I'm in room 1.
You are?
Yep, it told me I was in room 1.
Well, interesting.
Do you want me to put me in a different?
Not join. I'm going to move you back to room 1. Well, no, it says because there's a couple other people in there.
Actually, this is what it tells me on my screen. The host is inviting you to join breakout room 1.
Go ahead and click yes. There you go. I went ahead and paused it while we were doing that. So, all right. So this document was entitled 5 Reasons to be Concerned About the Assignment of Individual Paraprofessionals. So we ask you to think about and read about the 5 reasons. So each group should have had a speaker identified or chosen, and however you wanted to do that. So reason 1 was the least qualified staff members are teaching students with the most complex learning characteristics. So what can group 1 tell us about what they read under this reason?
What we read there was to the fact of how there are, they are using paraprofessionals to provide the bulk of the instruction for students. And we found that obviously to be a problem. And especially, we actually had a unique group because we had a Strat 1 in our group, we had a Strat 2 in our group, and then we had a level 3 full pullout teacher in our group. So everybody was used a little bit differently. As far as Strat 1, what we said as Strat 1 teachers is we are not even supposed to teach any pull-out instruction. So therefore, if we can't do it ourselves, how are we supposed to make our paraprofessionals do that? So you know what, that's pretty much what we led into, was to the fact of making sure that we use our paraprofessionals in a manner to support, not to provide that instruction. And you know, like our Strat 2 teacher said too, you know, she does the bulk of the instruction, and then she'll use her paraprofessionals to support her, which is okay because they're not providing that bulk instruction.
Thank you for being the spokesperson on the team. Were there any questions from anybody else in the rest of the listening audience?
Bring it on, people.
Bring it on. They're ready.
That's my phone telling you to call somebody.
No, it's my phone, and I'm trying to figure out do not disturb, but I think I hung up on him just a minute ago. Okay. They'll probably call again. I don't know who it was. Sorry about that. Yeah, so I mean, that's been an age-old problem, and it's very easy to divide kids into groups and say, you take this one, I'll take this one, and maybe not provide, just for whatever reason, lack of time to collaborate, too many kids, etc. It's very easy to get into that rut of having someone else do that primary work with the kiddos. So awesome thinking about teachers are responsible for the bulk of the instruction, and the paras are responsible for some follow-up support. The interesting thing that you mentioned about Strat 1 not teaching pull-out instruction, that's an issue, and Ron, you can jump in if you want to. That's an issue we're trying to get clarification on from the department in terms of, you know, highly qualified language has basically kind of gone away with the Every Student Succeeds Act, whereas in the NCLB it was very clear in terms of what that looked like. So we're trying to get support for the field to know exactly what that means and looks like. We do know special ed teachers in Iowa have to have required certification and licensure, but beyond that it seems to be pretty unclear as to what kind of core instruction can gen ed teachers do, particularly at the secondary level. So Ron and I are trying to get clarification on that. Ron, is there anything else that you would say about that?
No, I think you covered it well. There are some, you know, primarily because of the switch to ESSA. There's some questions about that, but I think for the purpose of our discussion, I mean, you know, there is this idea that, you know, all students have the right to, you know, qualified teaching instruction, meaning, you know, teacher with appropriate licensing versus a paraprofessional doing the instruction. I think that's probably the biggest implication, which which was talked about there. So.
Yeah. All right. Thank you, Group 1. Group 2, you looked at paraprofessional supports are linked with inadvertent detrimental effects. What did you learn?
We just talked about, well, in relation to what we read, just kind of living it, I guess, seeing what they were talking about within the article, saying that students just have become a dependence on the associate, not necessarily just for academic reasons, like not having the ability to self-start a project or an assignment of that nature, but then also having peer interactions or lack of peer interactions, just doing or in relation to just being dependent upon the associate, I guess. And then we just kind of went through situations that we've had, or I think Sandy was talking about a move-in that she had, and just dealing with some of those lack of independence issues, or just being so dependent on an associate, and just kind of the detrimental effects of them moving forward through their academic career and wanting them to succeed, but having to try to pull back the reins and have a balance with that as well.
Did you talk about how you work towards less dependence and more independence? Did anybody have kind of a plan or a process they work through for that?
We didn't get that far in the conversation. We kind of got that 1 minute warning sticker thing coming up when we were kind of getting into that. So
okay.
If anyone else has any ideas, we'd be open to them.
Yeah. What are other people's thought about the idea of creating detrimental dependence on adult support for not only academics, but those other things regarding peer relationships, task initiation, some of those executive function kinds of things? Or even ways that you wean paras off of kiddos. Thoughts?
I can say that a couple of things that have worked for us as our students get closer to that transition to middle school, 5th and 6th grade, we start beginning to give them set tasks at certain times of the day, maybe a job of some sort to start their day, an activity that they're responsible for going and beginning before our instructional sessions even start. So they're starting to learn just that routine, that there is a routine in existence. We also have worked with some picture schedules for some of the kids, not necessarily only with academics, but things like, what are the 5 things you do when you get to school in the morning, or what are the 5 things you need to do before you walk out that door to get on the bus? Mm-hmm. Things like having an agenda book, having their backpack packed, just those things, giving them real clear specifics that they can check, and letting them fail, letting them make a mistake and walk out without something, or, they leave their computer out unplugged, and what is that circumstance that they walk into the next day? A computer that's not charged. So allowing them to fail and making that very clear to the parents that it's okay for them not to get everything perfect. We talked a little bit about that in our, I was in the number 1 group about how it's not what the para thinks needs to be put down on the paper, it's what the student needs or feels needs to be put down, and then let them make those mistakes. That's how they learn. So just routine.
Great. Okay. And giving them some supports along the way, some more naturally occurring supports. I make lists all the time.
Yes.
I would forget my head most days if I didn't have, it screwed on. So yeah, that's an adult thing that everybody uses, a list, a calendar, whatever, and it's naturally occurring. So thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, reason number 3, individual paraprofessional supports are linked with lower levels of teacher involvement. What did you learn about that?
We felt that the key statement was the one, the second paragraph where it said Understandably, busy teachers tend to work with other students when they know the student with disability already has individual attention. We talked about that being human nature, and kind of tried to not sort this out as good or bad, but just this is kind of a fact of something that just naturally happens when you've got a student who has someone working with them one-on-one. The piece we took a little exception to was the part about you had higher teacher engagement when the classroom paraprofessional was under the direction of the teacher. Although that might be true in all of our situations, and that was upper elementary and middle school, the paras really aren't under the direction and in collaboration with the teacher whose classroom they're in. It's more like going to this classroom for 30 minutes and they're moving to a different classroom for 30 minutes and then another classroom. And hey, if you're watching a video that day, maybe you go somewhere else where you're needed. So our real world doesn't quite look like what the article said.
Yeah, and you know, thank you, every case is absolutely different. And you know, I think the point of that would be that gen ed teacher recognize their role as the primary teacher for that kiddo, because they're a gen ed student first, and make sure they are interacting and are supporting the engagement of the child. I had a situation recently where the para actually stepped back and started working with some other kiddos, and so the general ed teacher could come back and work specifically with the student in a math classroom, and it worked out beautifully. Got some, you know, needed support, some additional instruction from that highly qualified gen ed teacher, and it worked perfectly. Not always able to do, in addition to, you know, trying to get it done, the ability to collaborate, to have time to collaborate on what you could, would, should, change, do, etc., is often difficult. So we just don't have that time to plan with, as a special ed teacher, you don't have time to plan with your para or your gen ed teacher often. So there's a lot of factors that are involved, but yes, that engagement of the gen ed teacher in the child's education, that gen ed classroom, I think is the point. Other thoughts about that one? Okay, we'll keep moving on. Reason 4, teachers, parents, and students may not be getting what they deserve and expect. What was that all about?
That one was talking about how paras might not receive training or receive supervision while they're working, and they might not be qualified to be in providing the instruction in the area that they are. They might be unskilled or underskilled to do those services. Mm-hmm. And then it also was talking about how many times there's no planning for them that is written down. It might be happening orally, but it's not giving them a written plan of what to do. Uh-huh. And it also mentioned the flip side, saying that the person supervising the paraprofessional might not have had any training in supervision skills.
All very valid points. You know, we do tend to throw a para right in, not knowing what the skills are that they need to be engaging in with the student, not having a plan to address the skills gap between what they are supposed to be doing and what they actually know how to do. You're right, that often is not provided. And again, as we talked about just a minute ago, there's often little time for that planning, because the child that needs a para, we get them right, you know, we get them going right away as soon as we can find someone, and there's no time to really do that planning. And I have had situations where the parent or the teacher doesn't understand what their role is. So I see that as well, as I'm sure many of you do. Are there any of you who have a really good plan in place where you are looking at the individual needs of the student, you're determining what the para really needs to know and be able to do, and then providing that training? Anybody made it work?
I can chime in on that. Every 2 weeks we have a formal data review. And at that time I'm able to do that. I only have 7 students on my roster. I'm the one who has the self-contained classroom that Lori spoke of, or Tasha spoke of earlier. And at that time, then we evaluate where we've been over the last couple of weeks and the occurrences, things that we've seen in the classroom. But at that time, we also look ahead to needs over the next couple weeks and see if there's any weak areas, anything that we need to highlight together as a team. And any training that I can do or any resources I can provide, we gather all of that at that point. But it's a scheduled time and we're consistent. We even put a sign on the door that says meeting in progress so we don't get interrupted by other people from the building. So, and it's working for us.
You use data.
Yep.
You have time to collaborate, and you plan to address the needs of the child as well as the adults, it sounds like.
Right.
Yeah, awesome. All right, reason 5, providing paraprofessional supports may delay attention to needed changes in schools. So tell us about that one. What group had number 5?
We did.
Okay.
One of the biggest things was the parents talked about how they felt solely responsible. A lot of times they were kind of the direct route to gen ed teachers and parents, and then things get missed because that teacher kind of gets cut out a little bit. So they felt like they were more responsible for that student's success. And we talked about how strengthening collaboration would probably help take care of that. Like a lot of people have said, things are busy and you don't have time to sit and talk to them. You don't have time to look and see, do they have the right training? What is the reason we're using this para? Is it just because we have too much on our plates and we need another person? Or are we really looking at what do these kids have, or what are their needs, and what skills does the para have, and are they matched?
Yeah, kind of what we talked about earlier in terms of time and skills and that need. So awesome. And then finally, just for time's sake, considerations for educational teams. Who's in group 6 that's going to report out?
I guess I can.
All right, thanks, Diana.
It's just a general overall of what everybody just talked about. There needs to be, we need to advocate for exploring different supports that focus on strengthening what we have, collaboration between SPED and Gen Ed and the paras. Parental input's important. Involve the students and just be supportive of Gen Ed teachers and the paras. Ask what they need. I know, and we started this year, every first Thursday we meet, special ed teachers meet after school, just informal. And then third Thursday, we include the paras. So I think it's a starting point for us, and hopefully we'll get more into more of a learning community, I think. That's what you want to call it.
Sure. Well, the common thing that I'm kind of hearing across all of this is time and collaboration and involving people in discussions about what those needs are and how can we best meet those needs, whether they're a gen ed teacher, a special ed teacher, or a parent. So we'll kind of move away from this article. One of the things that Ron and I talked about, and let's see, one of the things we talked about is how do teams determine whether a para is needed or not, and how do teams determine whether a para is not needed anymore, and the need for our AEA to provide some specific guidance on that. There are a number of tools out there. but we don't have anything that we've said. Green Hills thinks that this is the cat's meow in terms of thinking about para support and when it's needed. These are the questions that you should ask. So we're going to be working on that. Ron and I have that for a goal, and we meet in a couple weeks to start planning our next session with you, which I think is on behavior and manifestation determination. So hopefully we'll be able to come up with something by then. Until we get to that, one of the things that we had questions and concerns about, and this specifically relates to waiting on IEPs, is how para services are documented. So we know the child needs a para. We've had all these really rich discussions about, you know, everything that we've just talked about, and then how do we document that? And so Ron and I, we looked on some IEPs recently and tried to pull out some statements that we felt like were really good examples of how paras were written, and some examples where perhaps more information was needed. So Ron, I turn it over to you and maybe let you kind of facilitate this part of it. I can pull that document up.
You bet, yeah. Yeah, so and this document is linked, well, it's linked in the PowerPoint, so you have access to this. So we just spent some time pulling some examples and what we call non-examples. Actually, in this document, I believe all but maybe one or two. I think I snuck at least one fake one in there, but the majority of these are real. We pull them from IEPs. We change names to protect the innocent and so forth, so they're not identifiable. But I think one good guiding principle is the stranger test. So if someone, and clarity, need for clarity. So if a person who doesn't know your student is reading that IEP and they come to the PP or the TA box, whatever types of para services are being provided, and they read that, are they going to have a clear picture of what service is actually provided? Not meaning, you know, that has to be a 2-page, you know, document describing para services, but just, you know, clear and concise, you know, can be really effective. Time bound, for one thing. Well, we know that in you know, page F is going to require you to put minutes in there, but also in your narrative, just enough detail so that a person reading it would know exactly what's happening. So yeah, I'm just trying to think the best way to tackle this as a group here. I mean, let's look at a few at least here, and then maybe as you're looking at it, you may have some questions. And the first one on there, Sammy will have a special education trained adult for 84 minutes a day to assist with appropriate attention seeking and time on task in the classroom. Sammy will also have a trained instructional coach with him to assist in the development of employability skills, time on task, efficient work speed, etc. during his work experiences each day for 84 minutes. Sammy has a trained special education associate with him during 40% of the school day. Okay, so there's a fair amount of clarity in there. And I would also notice that the question is answered, what's the reason for that para? What's that para doing? Versus the general statement. You know, we see several specific disability-related issues that para is working on. Okay, so, and I was going to point out, it also, I mean, it's explicit in there, and you know, a reader of the IEP could also do the math, but it is helpful. So, for example, it says that Sammy has a para with them for 40% of the school day. Going back to that weighting issue that Angie had mentioned, you know, when we look at verifying the student weightings, you know, level 1, 2, or 3, you know, para services, that's one area where points are assigned. But I think most of you know that the way that's looked at is, I'm just staring at the matrix right now. If a para is with a student 49% or less, or 50 to 74% of the day, or 75 to 100% of the day, that determines not overall level, but 1, 2, or 3 points. So, you know, the proportional amount of points that would go into that weighting decision have to do with how much time they might be spending with the student. So that's just one example. And I think you can see it on the screen here, but couple down where it says Jane, maybe just some different way. This one says Jane requires access to a paraprofessional throughout all academic tasks to assist with attention to task, modification of content and behavior as necessary in the general education classroom, 170 minutes per day. This is not a one-on-one para, however, it should not exceed a 1-to-3 ratio. Some districts provide clarity in these statements by talking about a ratio. So, for example, if there are some students that maybe they have access to a para all day, but it's not a one-on-one situation. So you can see in this description it's saying that there are a number of disability-specific things that a para is going to help Jane with, but it's saying that sometimes may be in a 1-to-3 ratio. So there's a para available in the classroom, also working with other students. So I can, a reader, if I was looking at weighting on that, I could do the math and say that, well, the direct time a para is spending with Jane is going to be, a much smaller percentage of the day in assign points along those lines. But Angie, maybe just if we just glance at a couple if you could go up to the top again. Sorry, a couple of those we're saying as non-examples. Just and you'll see we're talking about just issues of clarity. Nathan will have para support in the general education classroom to assist Nathan with his academic needs in no greater than a 1-to-4 ratio listed for 200 minutes per day. I actually put that one in there as a non-example. On one hand, it's time bound and it's clarifying that no, it's not a one-on-one. I guess my critique of that one was that it's pretty general, helping with academic needs. So the stranger test again. What does that really mean? Is that we could have a lot of general ed students who we might say it'd be great for them to have someone helping with academic needs, but it would be better to say what exactly is the role or what is the purpose of that para in Nathan's life, along with the time there. Now Paul, the second one there actually is a fake one, but it's based on real ones I've seen that we hopefully get clarified or corrected before those IEPs go through. But Paul will have assistance from a classroom para as needed for help with task completion. That I thought about putting the red not sign with as needed. It has to be time bound and specific to the student's needs. We are not able to say they can have access to a para as needed, because that starts to sound like just a classroom para that's there, and Paul may receive some help for that, but that doesn't imply any specific service, for a student with a disability to help them acquire faith. So just very general, one like that. What if we, Angie, could you scroll down again? There's a Joseph. Let's see. Okay, let's read that one and see maybe why we might have put that in the not so perfect category. Joseph will have access to a paraprofessional throughout his day to provide individualized and repeated instructions, especially if the direction requires multiple steps in order to support Joseph in a full class participation with a ratio of 1-to-1 or 1-to-2. They will also monitor behaviors such as picking and pulling hair that is self-injurious. Social skills and interactions will be monitored, and appropriate interactions will be taught and modeled as they occur. Angie, I think you grabbed that one from somewhere in Web IEP space. Do you want to?
Did I? I don't remember. I think part of.
Or maybe I did.
I don't remember.
You just grabbed a lot of it, but when I'm looking at that one, the thing that jumped out to me is, on one hand, there's some detail in there about what the para is doing, but I guess the idea of, he'll be supported with a 1-to-1 or a 1-to-2. It's kind of the question: what does Joseph really need? that starts to sound more like if we have a one-to-one, we'll do it. If we don't, we'll make it a 1-to-2. So that's I think it's that or statement that maybe I did put that one there, Angie, that I think would maybe make us think. Yes, there's some detail, but it kind of leaves it open to interpretation. And I think of even when you get into contentious situations, a parent might be thinking, well, they're supposed to have a 1-to-1, but they snuck in that or 1-to-2 type of a thing. So just clarity.
Yeah. Yeah. So there's a number of other examples in here that you could take a look at, and again, as Ron said, clarity is probably the key factor. So anybody that can pick it up can look at it and understand. A parent advocate, an administrative law judge. I mean, my mind always goes to the worst case scenario. If there should be a complaint, a due process complaint or question, how do we truly know what's going on? And as a benefit, it helps us when we're trying to weight these IEPs to know exactly what's occurring for the student.
And also just one thing I might add. Sometimes your administrators, sometimes they will have questions for us about weighting because they might be thinking, wow, Jane has a para, why isn't she level 2 or why isn't she level 3? And then we have those discussions that, a little bit about what we talked about. Well, on one hand, if you have a individual para that's working only with Jane, it's going to impact the weighting this much versus a shared para that's going to kind of change things. So sometimes we do, we fairly often we have those kind of discussions with school administrators that maybe that are having to deal with the cost aspects of paraprofessional services.
So I have a question then. Is a range, let's eliminate the 1-to-1 out of it. Let's say it was a higher range, 1-to-4 to 1-to-6 or something like that. Are you saying we should not have a range?
My preference, my personal preference is no, because that becomes less clear. And I know what you mean, and I there are examples out there that go through that some. So you're thinking, for example, the para support might range from a 1-to-4 in reading. It might be a 1-to-2 in math, that type of thing.
Correct. So for example, science lab might require a lower ratio because it's hands-on with things that, need more supervision, as opposed to in another class where the format is less hands-on. But is it better just to say, list the top level of that ratio up to blank?
Yeah, the part that I don't like as much when you put that range is a reader, someone might look at that and say, well, did they just put the ratio because that's how it worked out? They happen to have one para for 3 kids in this class, and they happen to have one para for 4 kids in this class. You know what I mean? I know that's not the way it is, but someone might misinterpret that and think, they just used the ratio that was convenient based on the para staff that they had out there. And it also starts to sound more like, yep, there's just a general para in that room, and we're going to call that a special service, which is different than we're sending a para that's specifically meeting Johnny's needs. So so I get a little nervous about the ranges, but I realize it's sometimes that's reality and sometimes that's necessary.
One other thing, Ron, I tried to click to get access to this document, and just so you know, it says we don't have access to it. So
I'm sorry.
Ron, fix that right away.
Yeah, yep. Just said I needed to request access from you.
Sorry, let me get there and just do that, just to make sure you guys have.
Angie, I see your lips moving, but I can't hear anything.
Darn it, I was on mute. My computer has gone into fan mode, so I'm afraid it's really loud. So in terms of co-teaching, if you're putting co-teaching on the IEP, make sure you're prepared to talk with parents and the team in terms of what that's going to look like. I've linked a document in there, and you can all see that. That has the different models of co-teaching. For example, one teach, one observe, one teach, one assist, and so forth. So you can take a look at that later. But I've had a recent instance where we had co-teaching that was supposed to be occurring, and it was written in the IEP between a math teacher and a special ed teacher, and there was no co-teaching going on. When the parent asked about what that looks like, neither the special ed teacher or the gen ed teacher could talk about it. The special ed teacher was in the back of the room, and the gen ed teacher was doing all of the instruction and was going back and talking with the student during, periods of time during the day, and there was no co-teaching going on. So we just need to be careful from a legal perspective. Write what's really going on in the class and be prepared to talk about what model of co-teaching you're using, what that looks like if you're going to put it on the IEP. And then make sure there's that time for collaboration, because you can't co-teach without collaboration. What we know about co-teaching is we've kind of come back to many students benefit from some very structured, very intense support outside of the gen ed classroom to build those skills. Co-teaching can still be used, and it's effective for some, but it's not the model for everybody. So just be careful when you're talking about co-teaching and be able to answer those specific questions for parents.
And for documentation, co-teaching on page F, that's a question that comes up often too. The bottom line question, if a special education teacher is actively engaged in co-teaching, does that time, quote, count as SDI? Yes, it does. It would be of course, in the gen ed environment, we presume, so just in a different setting. And so Angie and I were just talking about this recently. So let's imagine, we have a middle schooler, and maybe the IEP says 80 minutes of, I'll make up a number here, of co-teaching per day. And the narrative might say, the special education teacher is present and co-teaching in science and math classes at the middle school each day, period. So, if I were to read that, I would presume that special education teacher is present in the math and the science classes and engaged in co-teaching in, one of the models, that Angie mentioned. There's different delivery systems in co-teaching, but that 80 minutes would, I would view that as, 80 full minutes of SDI, because that special education teacher is there and involved with a student for those 80 minutes. But then I think Angie's example was more a case where that just wasn't really happening. So, yeah.
All right, and just very quickly in terms of collaboration, if you're listing collaboration on the IEP, make sure it's happening. Drive-by collaboration. Hi, how are things going? Oh, they're going well. Good. Check, we've done our collaboration. That's not legally defensible. And so make sure that you have scheduled time for that collaboration, that in fact, maybe you have some notes from that and so forth. So make that very structured and relevant to the particular student's needs. We don't have much time left. Just in terms of Form G, we linked a reference there for extended school year from the Department of Education's website. This is a perfect time to kind of talk about that. A couple of the things we wanted to make sure we reminded you of would be that a parent can appeal a decision if the IEP team says no to extended school year. they have a right to appeal that, and so there has to be plenty of time for them to go through that due process, if you will. And so it's recommended that you start those conversations at least 60 calendar days prior to the end of the school year. You should be having those conversations at every meeting. That's why it's on Form G at the top. And so have those conversations, and then if you have to have a specific meeting about extended school year later in the school year, that should be a part of the meeting notice, and it should be done at least 60 days prior to the end of the school year. Ron, was there anything else about that?
No, I think that, no, I don't think so. I think that the big reminder is, yeah, just make sure that just caution, make sure the conversation does happen versus, you know, sometimes appropriately, you know, in September IEP meeting, it might be said that we'll talk about this later, but make sure that follow-up does happen, that so that the parent wouldn't feel like it was just glossed over, and it really, and you know, and frankly, it really should be, if the teacher, you know, kind of facilitating the IEP says Johnny wouldn't need or qualify for extended school year, I mean, they should, you know, you should be prepared to explain why, you know, the reason why that wouldn't be necessary, and that, yeah, the tricky part is that sometimes can be kind of time consuming, because, you know, we know that many parents would just say, well, summer school, that'd be great for Johnny. Yeah, he's a struggling reader. He has a reading disability. We should do that, you know. And so the whole explanation of that it's a kind of a rare and unusual service. It's not just summer school, and just the reasons, including potential regression or special circumstances that we might use as a basis for that. So, I mean, that really does, you know, without glossing over it, I mean, that really does require some explanation to the parents, and sometimes that can be tricky, because they, you know, many or maybe most of our kids would benefit from extended school year services, but is the need. Do they need that because of a disability?
Right. And possibly the last thing we're going to be able to talk about today, we can save the other two forms for next time, would be transportation. And so we've also linked a Q&A document in the PowerPoint, and it is very good about looking at specific scenarios. Some of the ones that come up most frequently are, you know, do all special ed kids qualify? No, they don't. There are rules about transportation that districts have to follow, and you'll see one of those in the first couple of questions. So, for example, a district wouldn't have to transport a student if they're within 2 miles of the school building, unless the district does that for all kids. And so if a student lives a mile from school and the district only picks up kids via the bus if they live 2 miles out, then that student would not automatically get transportation. And sometimes we have parents say, well, I just don't have my child, I don't have a way to get my child to school. Well, that doesn't constitute eligibility for specialized transportation. Preschool is also an area that we get questions about all the time, and that's a tricky one. There are general ed kiddos that ride the bus just very well, but children with disabilities, you know, they struggle. They've got cognitive issues, speech and language issues where they can't communicate should they get hurt, physical issues. And so those transportation issues with preschool kiddos are a little trickier, but they are not automatically obligated to get specialized transportation. There should be a discussion, and you look through some of the questions in the procedures manual and in this document about what constitutes the need for special transportation. And hopefully that will guide you. Regional administrators or your SPED reps are also there to provide some assistance with those too. Ron, anything else about transportation, or does anybody have a specific question about transportation?
What I wondered, Angie, is if I just put a little note here, I wondered if, I mean, yeah, that's the thing, something like transportation, we could spend a whole course on that if we
yes.
drive you all crazy. But I wonder if maybe that extended school year length that kind of gives them like kind of a review of that process and the transportation. You know, I wonder if we could kind of give people homework and say, kind of review those between now and February, and then when we meet in February, maybe I would love it if people would come with specific questions. Say, I noticed this, tell me more about that, and then maybe we could start our February session out and just taking a few minutes to tackle some of those.
Okay. That sounds good to me.
Transportation can be, I mean, there seems like there's a lot of contention. I mean, it comes up a lot, you know, sometimes debates about when parents believe that there should be transportation, and sometimes that's challenged. So.
Right. Right. All right. So we'll cover those two. Come with questions. Review those documents for next time, and we'll cover the last couple of slides. You can look at those as well next time, which is February 13th. And as I said, Ron and I are going to be meeting in a couple weeks to start planning for that time. So if you have any specific questions about discipline and manifestation determination, please don't hesitate to send us a quick email or a chat. We'll try to make sure we include that in the discussion.
And that is a big, you know, sometimes muddy area, but it is really important. I mean, when, you know, really for all ages, I mean, maybe particularly for those of you that work in middle and high school, when you're more likely to get situations like suspensions but I mean, it certainly can happen in elementary as well. But it's just, I mean, you want to have a really good working knowledge of the rules that kind of guide that, as far as you know, when do you need to do a manifestation determination? To what extent can students with IEPs be suspended, expelled? So it's just kind of a big topic, and really a good one for us to review with you guys as veterans. So.
Well, thank you everybody for joining us this afternoon, and we will see you next time. Have a great rest of your evening and a great rest of your week. And have fun in the snow on Friday.
Thank you.
9 inches.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.